Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, Alpecin-Deceuninck domination, some tentative early skirmishes on GC and a Primoz Roglic who doesn't care. I'll be looking back at a dramatic opening weekend of the Tour de France and the opening stage of the Women's Giro. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that tension and nerves are never higher than they are at the Tour de France. This was Jonathan Milan, more than a little upset at Biniam-Girmay after yesterday's intermediate sprint, whilst Brian Coquard was equally annoyed with Paul Penouet. The stakes are high, that's for sure. More on the reasons for that spat later on in this show. We also learned that Cofidis' Tour didn't get off to the best start. They had €150,000 of bikes stolen ahead of stage 2 of the race. And in a statement, the team said the door of the workshop truck was forced open and 11 of our Look Cycle bikes were stolen despite the security measures that had been put in place. So, if you see any cheap looks for sale, some of them only just released for the Tour de France, please let the team and the police know. And finally, we learned that Alpecin-Deceuninck are the first trade team ever to have won the first 2 stages of the Tour de France with 2 different riders who both went into the yellow jersey. Now, since 2021, when Alpecin did their first ever Grand Tour, they've now racked up 29 stage wins. In that time, only UAE and Visma have more, with 35 and 33 respectively. It's a remarkable record, and the way they seem to hit their goals and objectives year after year is mightily impressive. I mean, it helps to have Mathieu van der Poel in your ranks, but still, chapeau. Stage 1 really was a case in point. The big favourites for the stage were Jonathan Milan and Tim Merlier. They've both been faster than Philipsen regularly in the sprint finishes this season. But Alpecin always seemed to find a way. Whilst the other teams were, in the words of Remco Evenepoel, sleeping, Alpecin were vigilant as ever. None other than Jonas Vingegaard was the first to light things up in some crosswinds with just under 20 k's to go. But with Visma, UAE and others also pushing the pace, there was soon a split. Alpecin had 5 guys in that split, more than any other team. For the final 20 k's of that stage, the average speed of that front group was 55.5 kilometers per hour, which is 34.5 miles per hour. So if you wondered why the group behind wasn't managing to close the gap, that is half the reason. The other is that the teams that should have been fully committed just weren't. And by that I predominantly mean Soudal Quickstep and Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe. Both those teams have split objectives for the race, for both GC and sprint, and that was probably what caused the initial hesitation. But when there's a split as dangerous as that one going up the road, somebody just needs to make the call immediately that it's all hands on deck. Nobody's saving themselves for the lead out or the sprint, we just need to get our GC leaders back on terms. But that didn't happen, and the cost to Evenepoel, Roglic and Lipovic amongst others was a 39-second gap on GC after just 1 stage. And for Evenepoel, that drastically diminishes his chances of going into the yellow jersey after the time trial later on this week. It's not impossible, but it's gone from highly likely to somewhat unlikely, I would say. Anyway, back to the front of the race, and Alpecin played it perfectly. They made sure that nothing got away, then set themselves up in the perfect formation for the finish. Van der Poel was 3rd from last, dropping off Caden Groves, a winner in his own right of course. His speed stretched things even further, and when Philipsen kicked off the back of it, it just wasn't even close. He finished length clear of Biniam-Girmay of Intermarché, who would take the first white jersey of the race as the best young rider. Now for Philipsen, it was his 10th Tour de France stage win. Only 28 riders in the history of the race have won more than that. 3rd on the day was Søren Varensholt of Uno X, who also rode impressively well. Most impressive of all, for me at least, was Jonas Abrahamsen beasting it in the front echelon. I mean, his participation at the race was in doubt when he broke his collarbone at the Tour of Belgium, so to be doing that just over 2 weeks later was next level stuff. So, Alpecin led going into stage 2, a much hillier and longer affair into Boulogne-sur-Mer on the northern coast. Add in more wind and quite a lot of rain at the start of the stage, it was always going to be another stressful one. Now thankfully things had dried up by the midway point, and the first real action came at the intermediate sprint. The 4 breakaway rides were still up the road at that point, albeit only by a handful of seconds, which meant we didn't really get to see the full lead out from the teams behind. However, this morning I looked back on the multi-screen view to see what the beef was between Milan and Girmay, and it was bizarre actually that Milan was so angry. So he basically ran out of Lidl Trek teammates, and then spent quite some time trying to get onto the Intermarché train. Biniam Girmay was having none of it, as you would expect, and he gave as good as he got. Milan did end up winning the sprint from the main group by the tiniest of margins, but in my opinion, he had no right to be that angry. To be fair to him though, there was some footage of him after the race going straight up to Biniam Girmay to apologise, which was nice to see. After that, the stress didn't reduce because it wasn't far to the hill zone. Visma Lease-a-Bike, as consistent as ever, delivering Vingegaard to the right place at the right time every time it mattered. However, they did burn quite a lot of matches in that period. On the Côte de Haut-Pichot, Van Aert drilled it on the front, and his pace, combined with a bit of a kerfuffle behind, caused a split in the group. Now, it had come back together before the penultimate climb of the day, which was the Côte de Saint-Étienne-en-Mont. There, Groupama FDJ lit it up. Lewis Askey going full throttle at the bottom and putting everyone in the hurt box. But it worked, because by the top, his teammate Romain Grégoire had made the front split along with Jorgensen, Pogačar, Vingegaard, Evenepoel and Van der Poel. Not a bad list of names to be with. Kevin Vauquelin also bridged by the top, and as it was a bit cagey, there was also a bit of a regrouping over the top and down the other side. Vauquelin went again on the descent, and then again on the final climb, and then again with 4 kilometres to go. On that particular occasion, he was followed by Jorgensen, but he refused for the most part to work with him, much to the Frenchman's annoyance. Once he was caught though, Florian Lipovic went, rain jacket in his back pocket to boot. Unfortunately for him, UAE weren't going to let him get away. And Narvaez and then Almeida made sure of that, and with just under a kilometre to go, it was all back together. And this is where the Van der Poel magic happens. Yes, he's got all the power and talent in the world, but at the same time, he seems to make all the right positioning decisions and knows exactly where he needs to be and when he should use that power. So he ends up on the front a little bit too early, but on an uphill finish, he just doesn't want to get boxed in. He finally kicks to the line with 150 metres to go, and there's no answer from anyone else. Not even Tadej Pogačar can get around him. Rather surprisingly, that's actually his first stage win at the Tour de France since 2021, where his victory on the Mur de Bretagne also netted him the yellow jersey. So, what have we learnt from the opening 2 days of racing? Well, top of my list is that Jonas Vingegaard is racing in a completely different style, and it's absolutely brilliant to watch. Not only was he instrumental in causing the split in the crosswinds on the opening day, he also attacked over the top of the final climb yesterday, and then at the finish, when you'd normally expect him to just cruise in somewhere in the middle of the group, he sprints to the line and picks up 4 bonus seconds in third place, meaning he's only lost 2 seconds to Pogačar. Now, we first saw this style of racing at the opening stage of the Criterium du Dauphiné, and it appears we're going to see plenty more of it. What's brought on that change, I don't know, but perhaps Visma have gone back to the drawing board, realising that their previously successful strategy is not going to work against a new, improved Pogačar. Whether or not this one succeeds remains to be seen, of course, but I do applaud them for trying. It's great to watch. We also learned that Alpecin are the new Quickstep, although we've known that for a few years now, but we also discovered that in modern racing, every day seems to be like a classic, which suits Alpecin perfectly, of course. Now, that style of racing is in part down to how the riders are racing, but also in part down to course design. So ASO have seen that sprint stages are not drawing the TV audiences that they're hoping for, i.e. they're much lower than other stages in which there's more action throughout. No big surprise there in many respects, but what does it mean for sprinters in the future? Well, they're going to have to be more versatile, which they already are to a degree, but it does feel like the days of the pure sprinters might be numbered if this trend continues. There are a handful of opportunities at this year's Tour de France, one of which is today, but certainly not all the back-to-back stages of the past. And finally, we learnt that Primoz Roglic apparently didn't care about his lost time on stage 1, and that he's no longer thinking about the top step of the podium, and that he's proud of his career, which he should be, of course. He's won more World Tour level stage races than any other current pro rider. He's a champion and will always be remembered as such. However, these comments to reporters after that stage must have ruffled a few feathers within the team itself, surely. He's a very highly paid rider who came in as the team's leader, and that was clearly evident on stage 1 because Lipovic was not helped by any teammates to come back to the group after he had a mechanical problem. So for his teammates to hear that, for the management to hear that, must have felt like a bit of a kick in the teeth, you've got to say. Everyone's got to make huge sacrifices to arrive at the Tour de France in the best shape possible, and they're all happy to lay themselves on the line to forego any of their own chances in order to give their leaders the best chance possible for success. Now, I personally took Roglic's comments with a pinch of salt. I mean, it's always been clear he doesn't really relish talking to reporters, he just likes to race his bike. Those comments were said probably in the heat of the moment. I'm not even sure if he really meant them, certainly not the way they came out anyway. I do hope we see him performing well over the remainder of this year's Tour de France, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does. Right, just before I move on, a quick mention of riders who've already been forced to leave the race. So on stage 1, there were a number of crashes, a couple of them involving Filippo Ganna and Stefan Bissegger. They both hit the deck but were able to continue for a while, but did eventually withdraw. Ganna was eventually diagnosed with concussion, so let's just keep our fingers crossed that he recovers swiftly from that. The race will continue today with a 178k stage from Valenciennes to Dunkirk. One climb en route, Mont Cassel, which comes with 30k's to go. Too far out to cause any real problems, and with a headwind for most of the final 60k's, expect the first bunch sprint of the race, and one that's likely to be extremely chaotic. Just before I move on, a quick mention of our shop. The t-shirt designs for this year have proven particularly popular, so thank you to everyone who's already made a purchase. If you'd like to make a purchase yourself, simply head to shop.globalcyclingnetwork.com or scan the QR code that you should find on the screen right now. On to the women's Giro d'Italia now, which kicked off yesterday with a 14.2k individual time trial around Bergamo. Anna Henderson of Lidl Trek set off as one of the pre-stage favourites, and she duly delivered. She put 14 seconds into teammate Shirin van Androoy over her 18-minute effort. But there were still some big names to come. Lieke Nooyen of Visma Leasebike was the first to go quicker, but then came Anna van der Breggen. She was a second behind Henderson at the intermediate checkpoint, but then covered the last part 9 seconds quicker to place herself in the hot seat. She wasn't there for long though. By that point, Marlon Reusser of Movistar had started her effort, and she came through the intermediate checkpoint with a ridiculous time, 15 seconds faster than Anna van der Breggen, and that had increased to 20 seconds by the finish line. Kopecky and Longo Borghini were still to come, but it's going to take a standout ride from either of them to get close to Reusser, and so it proved to be. Kopecky got closest. She was 4 seconds down at the intermediate and 12 seconds down by the finish, with Longo Borghini finishing third at 16.7 seconds. So, another win and another incredible performance by Marlon Reusser. She really is on fire this season. However, I would say that the opening time trial does set us up for some quite interesting action over the general classification in the remainder of this race. So despite her form in the mountains this year, I don't think Reusser is going to have it all her own way over the remaining 7 stages. There's some climbing over the next 2 days, but the big test comes on Wednesday, where they'll have a summit finish to Val di Badene. That one is 11k's long at 7.4% average gradient. And now seems like a good time to remind you that you can watch a full season of bike racing live on Discovery Plus and Max. Just a couple of bits of other news before I wrap things up for this week. Dan Benton has, as ever, had his nose to the ground with all the latest transfer news and rumours. So first up, Ineos Grenadiers have confirmed they're going to finally have an official development team from next year. If that's the case, it will leave only Cofidis without one on the men's side, at least in World Tour level teams. Matteo Jorgensen has extended his contract with Visma Leasebike, which will see him at the team until at least the end of 2029. Bastien Tranchant will switch from Decathlon AG2R to Groupama FDJ, whilst Jack Haig is reportedly leaving Bahrain Victorious, although his destination is as yet unknown. Kevin Vauquelin is rumoured to be heading to Ineos Grenadiers, as is Filippo Ganna, so we'll have Filippo Ganna and Zanna there, whilst Jacob Alula are also set to lose Chris Harper to Q36.5. And yet another Jacob rider, Dylan Groenewegen, has been linked to the Unibet Tietema Rockets. That would be quite the coup for them, if true. Okay, that is all for this week's show. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll be back again next week, either late on Monday or first thing on Tuesday, because I'll be waiting for the end of Monday's medium mountain stage of the Tour de France to finish before I do next week's show. See you then.